Hi Booktopians, and welcome to a special Booktopian edition of Random Book Talk. I'm thrilled to have in the studio today Nicole Alexander, Australia's favourite bush storyteller and the best-selling author of The Bark Cutters, A Changing Land and her new book, Absolution Creek. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you very much, Brett.
So I'm very excited to be holding a finished copy of Absolution Creek, your third novel, in my hands. It came in today and it looks beautiful. Following the success of your first two books, The Bark Cutters and A Changing Land, both of which I loved, I hope you don't mind me saying, but this is your best book yet. It's an absolute cracker, and from the opening scenes in Sydney right to the end of the book, I kind of literally couldn't put it down. Could you tell us a little bit about the story and the three, or there are more than three, the main characters at its centre?
Okay. Firstly, thank you for your kind words regarding Absolution Creek. The work has an interweaving narrative, so it's set in two distinct time periods, the 1920s and the 1960s. And it has at its backdrop the dusty plains of the outback and the gleaming foreshores of Sydney Harbour at the time of the construction of Sydney Harbour Bridge.
Which I found fascinating, all of that history.
Yeah, and it was interesting delving into it and discovering the changes that actually hit North Sydney at that time. It was quite a brutal chapter in Sydney's history as well, with large numbers of families and businesses displaced, with buildings resumed by the government for a pittance, really, to make way for the bridge's approaches.
And that's where the story starts.
It does.
But we go far from Sydney, 800 miles or more.
We're introduced to Jack Manning, who's a grocer's son, and as he watches the construction of the bridge, he dreams of a better life. And although he's very young and inexperienced, he actually accepts a position to manage a sheep station, Absolution Creek, hence the title, some 800 miles from Sydney. And it's here that a young girl, Squib Hamilton, quite literally washes up on his doorstep. Yeah. And he learns of the devastating series of events which have basically altered her life and will continue to alter her life into the future.
Yeah, we don't want to give too much away, but there are some really wonderful characters in the book. You've named a few: Squib and Jack, Scrubber, Meg, and these characters over a few generations. I got to really know them, and I responded to what life threw at them and how they coped. And through that, a sense of the land. They're not all good characters in the novel, and we get to see all of their flaws. Who's your favourite?
I know people who read the book will probably have their own favourites, obviously, but mine is Scrubber. He really is something of the anti-hero in the novel. He actually harms the two people in the story that he actually cares the most about. And he ends up suffering from that. It really gnaws at his conscience to the extent that it causes a physical ailment. He becomes ill and becomes terminally ill. But his is a journey of redemption, and what he actually receives at the end isn't perhaps what he wanted, but he knows it's what he has to get to sort of continue on into the afterlife.
He's an interesting character, and through him we have this sort of page-turning suspense in some aspects as he's sort of journeying back to Absolution Creek in 1965, and you sort of feel the inevitable truth that is going to be revealed. Or I really responded to that part of the story. He's a fascinating and probably quite complex character.
Well, I think from my point of view, I wanted a character that was really going to drive the narrative forward, and he did that, and particularly because through him we have flashbacks back to the 1920s, and we see what actually made him what he is today, being the 1960s, and I think that draws you along as well. You have a certain idea of what happened in the past, what may have happened in the past. Well, what did he actually do that was so terrible that the ramifications is physically killing him?
Yeah. No, readers are going to so enjoy finding out what happens. Along with the human characters, having come from the land myself, I really responded to the characters of the properties in this book and the land itself. Wangallan Station, Waverley Station, Absolution Creek. You obviously have a fondness for the land and for Australia, and this is so evident in all of your books, particularly this one. You're from the land yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about your history?
Well, I'm a fourth generation grazier. So my own family property was first selected in 1893. Wow. So I guess I have a very strong emotional attachment to the land, and it's that sense of attachment and continuity that I try and reflect in my writing. My great-grandfather's buried on our property. So I have that. It's a very humbling feeling to know that you're involved in a business where your ancestors have lived and worked before you. Yep. And so when I write about the land, I sort of write about my own feelings towards it, because the land is a living thing and we are only custodians for the next generation. And I feel that it's only through the written word, perhaps you can give people who don't have the opportunity to experience the outback a sense of what it means to some of us.
Yeah, in that sense, this book is a real gift. I really loved that element, that affection that shines, in fact, all the way through the book. I'd like to touch on a particular aspect of rural life, and that is a lot of fathers. It's been a tradition in the bush for fathers to leave their properties to their sons, particularly their eldest sons. Having come from the bush, living in the bush now, is that tradition changing?
I think there's certainly a lot more flexibility where that's concerned. You know, when I first returned to the bush in the mid-90s, it was still very much a male-dominated industry as far as agriculture was concerned. Now with the advent of the internet, there's a lot more opportunities for women to be involved at a management level, right, inside the station office, and also physically outside if they choose to. And I think perhaps men are seeing the benefit of women on the land and what they can actually contribute to. How family dynamics are set up when it comes to passing on a family property have a lot to do with the size of the acreage as well, because obviously cost of living and cost of production has gone up across the board for everybody, city and country. So that's one of the main things. But yes, I do see that there's a greater understanding of what women can bring to the agricultural industry. And yes, you don't necessarily have to be a man to inherit a family property.
So a question I've been keen to ask you, now that this is your third book, so you're quite familiar with the publishing process. What's your favourite part? Is it the hours and hours that you spend alone writing the book, the researching, the editing process of when you finally sit down with your publisher and start putting, you know, the final stages of the book together? Or is it the glamour of the author tour?
Wow, well, as I'm about to set off on a 1-month tour, I don't know how glamorous it's going to be by the time I finish. But I have to say, for me, it's probably submitting the manuscript, right, knowing that I've got the work behind me and getting feedback. Because I live in quite a remote area, the feedback I get is either from family or a couple of close friends. So it's the feedback I get from Random House when the manuscript's first delivered, and that's really positive for me, either way, good or bad. So that actually gives me a lot of joy, because it covers two things. It's completed. Yes. And secondly, so far I've been very fortunate. People have liked my book, so it's always good to get the tick.
Because the process of writing is a fairly solitary activity.
It is, and that's probably one of the things I've found quite difficult insofar as what I do work-wise. I live in an isolated area, so you have a lot of solitary time in your business, and then to turn around and do something in the evenings and the weekends, which is also very isolating, is difficult at times. It's very challenging. But at the same time, that isolation means you really can create new and interesting worlds, hopefully for the reader.
Well, you get to spend the next month travelling the country. I believe you're going to far north Queensland, doing a lot of rural centres right around the country. So you'll be with people over the course of the next month. You probably will be hankering to get back to your property. Now, we like to ask all our guests if they can tell us their favourite book and a little bit about why.
I've always been a huge fan of Ernest Hemingway. I really admire the sparseness of his prose. Probably For Whom the Bell Tolls would be my favourite. So yeah, I just have always loved his writing, and just from an author's lifestyle point of view, if I'd been born a man, I would have been him. I mean, who can go past big game hunting and drinking martinis at 5 o'clock every afternoon? I just think that's wonderful.
It sounds like an amazing life. Well, thank you very much, Nicole.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Brett.
Absolution Creek is in store now. If you'd like to read a sample chapter, head to the website. You can also join in the conversation on our Facebook and Twitter pages. And while you're there, why not sign up to our e-newsletter to learn about books that are coming in the weeks and months ahead. Thanks again, everyone, and see you next time.